All right. Welcome back, everyone. I did start the recording, so just to let everyone know I am recording this. Eli, unfortunately, the chat now has gone away. So can you, I know you wanted to talk about some of the tools folks were talking about earlier. If you could just kind of tee that up again for everyone, please.
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks, Judge. Yeah, the comment is following on comments that were made by, I think it was Kevin. Sorry if I'm forgetting names, maybe from BGE. Someone else joined the phone. Maybe it was Dave from PE. But yeah, I mostly just wanted to follow up on the comments where folks were mentioning that there was a plan in place seemingly to expand upon forecast tools or procure forecast tools. And we just wanted to get a little bit of additional detail as to kind of what are the capabilities that are being sought, if there's any information that can be provided as far as like a potential timeline goes in terms of deploying those capabilities. Obviously, you know, we understand that software takes time to incorporate and get up and running, but just wanted to get as much detail as we could on what are the specific capabilities that folks envision, how they'll be used, when they'll be available, and kind of whatever folks can provide at this stage.
All right. Thank you, sir. Dave, you want to jump in?
Yeah, Eli, I was one of the ones that said that, and unfortunately, I don't have any of the details. I'm going off just a comment from our manager who's over our system planning support. Mentioned that they are in talks with a vendor that does do DER forecasting. So I don't have any more details other than that.
Okay.
All right. Joint utilities have anything on that front? Jacob here. There he is.
I'm here, but I don't have any of the details necessarily on those efforts.
Okay. All right.
Okay.
Is that something you might be able to look into? Maybe just try and get some maybe ballpark timelines or maybe just some information?
I can. It's something I'm definitely had on my list of things to do.
Okay, awesome. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks. Thank you both, and thanks, Judge. Yeah, just to kind of reiterate some of the rationale, you know, our comments on behalf of OPC were focused on kind of what is the status quo today, where do we need to go in the future, and what are the actions we need to bridge those gaps. And so obviously understanding the, you know, the capabilities that are expected and generally on what timeline they're going to be expected will really help inform conversations about how we get from today to a future state in which we're, you know, kind of enabled to fully incorporate and optimize, you know, functionalities related to DER and load forecasting. So thank you all for being willing to provide some of that information. Look forward to seeing that as soon as we possibly can.
And I think that maybe actually is one of the first actions that you had, Eli, or you, OPC, had on to bridge the gap, utilities developing capabilities to predict DER and electrification adoption. Is that kind of along the same vein, sir?
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Okay.
You know, I won't repeat all of our comments. Folks can see them in there, but yeah, that's exactly right. I remember hearing in the first phase that it might have only been one of the utilities, and I apologize for not being able to recall at this moment exactly which utilities it was, or if it was several, but there were limitations on there were limitations on how DER forecasts were being incorporated into current planning, and then also there was clearly like not uniformity across all of the utilities in terms of where they're at, which is of course understandable, but it would be, you know, it would be great to be able to kind of lay out the roadmap for how we get there, and that was the main intent in our comments.
Okay. All right, awesome. All right. And is it on the next page on 2C, you talk about developing reasonable assumptions for multiple scenarios. Now, are those the scenarios we talked about before, or are we talking new scenarios?
We're talking about the same scenarios, I think.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, when I'm talking about scenario analysis, it's related to forecasting primarily, and the idea that we have a base case and then we have a high case and a lower case, or a high case and a higher case, whatever it might be. But that's exactly right. This, for the forecasting piece, is really where the scenarios come into play. Just to add a little bit of color, historically, all utilities, not just Maryland utilities, have had one like deterministic plan as to how, one deterministic forecast that dictates the distribution system plan. And the idea of forecast is to move away from one deterministic scenario towards more probabilistic scenarios that allows you to have your kind of base case expectation, but also understand what it would take to get to alternative cases. That goes back to your point, Judge, about the conversation we had a few meetings back on what these alternative scenarios could look like.
All right, and that was my hope. I didn't know if I'm glad we're not talking about multiple new scenarios. So I thought that might have been an issue for some.
I would just clarify, there could theoretically be multiple scenarios, but yeah, you're right that like within forecasting, we're talking about forecasting when scenarios.
All right. Let's see, going through this. Yes, sir, Eric.
Yes, Judge. I just want to pull on that string a little bit, Eli. When you say scenarios, right, are you speaking to scenarios with assumptions to achieve climate solution now goals, as in, the high one may be achieving all the goals, right? And the mid one would be achieving somewhere in the middle. You're not speaking to different variations of turning each different knobs from EV and PV or anything of that nature, right? Within any of those scenario analysis, because it can really get complicated if that's where your mindset is.
Yeah, no, that's a good question, Eric, and thanks for teeing that back up. I think your interpretation is reasonable. If this is doing my best to recap a conversation we probably had 4-6 weeks ago. I feel like we kind of landed around the thinking that 3 scenarios might be like an appropriate and reasonable number of scenarios. Totally agree with you, Eric. You could theoretically pull on 100 different levers, and that's going to be incredibly complex to do. But yeah, the idea would be generally if you have some type of standard base case, and then beyond that, you could have, to your point, like the full-blown CSNA case. How do we achieve all of the goals dictated in the CSNA? And then perhaps a case somewhere between that. Again, I don't think we landed on, these are the 3 specific scenarios that we're going to do moving forward. But the idea being that, yes, there should be a somewhat limited number so that you can actually use them. If you have 100 different scenarios, they're going to be, completely unusable. But yeah, if I'm understanding your question correctly, I think that's correctly characterized.
Thank you. That's helpful as we are thinking internally, how to start preparing. That's the purpose of the questions is just to help us internally also, Eli. So thank you for sharing.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, sir. All right. And it looked like we kind of touched on the transparency aspect of things. And Jacob, was there, I don't know how familiar you are with the, or had a chance to read over OPC's comments, but, and I know you said there weren't any showstoppers that you could recall, but is there, in terms of the transparency issue, is there any problem, at least from the joint utilities, in terms of publishing their methodology and assumptions at the outset of the forecasting process?
I think that kind of goes back to the straw proposal, right? And having that methodology of engaging with stakeholders in the straw proposal process.
Okay. All right. Yeah. Okay. All right. It seems like we're kind of on the same page. That went significantly quicker than I had anticipated. Does anybody else have any thoughts or comments on OPC's comments, or what they're anticipating, what their proposed actions to bridge the gap as they see it?
This is Paul Verchinsky.
Yes, sir.
I'm generally in agreement where OPC is coming from.
Okay.
I mean, they're talking about the current state, where we want to get to, and then, obviously it's going to take some time to do that, and how do we bridge that in the interim?
Sure. And it sounds like, if I understood Jacob's comments at the beginning, that it sounds like that's what the utilities are anticipating presenting on the 14th, and in the 7th, hopefully, in their comments, as to kind of like where we are now and where they would like to go in the future.
Yep, that's correct, Judge. That's
Okay.
the plan for the joint Exelon utilities for the next meeting, was to have that in where we're at and where we see to be going and everything.
Yep. Okay. All right. Yes, sir, Mr. Cathan.
I'm actually mostly in support of OPC's comments. I think they're really great. The only comment I would have is on the increased granularity on the actions to bridge the gap. And I would suggest that there's Alyssa must invest in upgrading their forecasting software and to get forecasts. The new inverters that are being installed as of the first of the year have the capability of providing additional information, and I advocate that the utilities make use of that as additional sensors or information to provide information, either for forecasting or to support planning and operations. That's the only thing I would add.
Okay, thank you, sir. And Jacob, to follow up on that, is it fair to say that, at least from the joint utilities perspective, that those new inverters are going to be used as Mr. Cathan had suggested?
Unfortunately, I am less familiar with the smart inverters.
Okay.
Looks like Kevin just came.
Well, yeah, I'd like to ask. So the request is for the utilities to use the information from the smart inverters, and I guess what information do the utilities have access to from their smart inverters to use?
Well, that's the question that it is to you guys, in the sense that these will be installed and they have capability to provide information, and you can put requirements and have communications with those inverters if you were so to desire, and make it a requirement as part of interconnection.
Okay, so there'd be some requirements and COMAR changes potentially, it sounds like.
For example, some kind of a ping when under curtailment. There's information in terms of voltage levels or frequency, that could be determined. All of the inverters that are going to be installed have the capability to have communications through three different communications protocols. And the issue is, and this is really more perhaps a PSC or a state issue, is requiring that communications be accessed. Otherwise, they're essentially just out there being a much better inverter and able to deal with all the ride-through issues, but they're just not providing the real value that they can possibly provide. So I'm just an advocate for strong use of the inverters. And I know that this is more an interconnection working group issue, but I think that the information and the use of these inverters that can be exploited as part of distribution system planning.
Yeah, no, just trying to gain clarity around the detail that is available to the utilities.
Sure. And Mr. Cathan, is it your understanding that that particular issue is being handled by the interconnection working group?
Communications?
Yes, sir.
No.
Okay. All right.
I would note that the interconnection work group will be dealing with monitoring and control, I believe. But I do think, to David's point, I think the plans for how utilities plan to monitor and control is related to planning. And I would just note that, you know, whether or not you will monitor or control there's multiple ways to monitor, there's multiple ways to control, and it may vary by size of facility. And so talking about controlling and monitoring is really, you've got to get into the more of the details around what are you going to monitor, what are you going to control, what are you going to have autonomous settings for, what are you going to use grid edge technology to autonomously react to. So it's a pretty in-depth conversation that I think is applicable here and would be good to hear from the utilities on their plans for monitoring and control and how that's going to be integrated into planning.
Okay.
And that's separate from whether or not you have the smart inverter data. Some jurisdictions do require the reporting of smart inverter data if customers are participating in programs. So it can be a programmatic requirement. It doesn't need to be a blanket interconnection requirement, because if it's a blanket interconnection requirement, it can increase costs significantly to connect to the system. I'll stop there.
Maybe it's as simple as a tariff change. Samarit and then Eric.
Thank you, Judge. Just wanted to say generally staff is supportive of OPC's proposal in terms of DER forecast and stakeholder engagement. I just wanted to say that on the record. Thanks.
Thank you, ma'am. Eric.
Yes, thanks. On the subject of DER or smart inverter controls, I just want to remind that this working group is around distribution system process, right? Planning, distribution system planning. It's around planning the system. When we are talking about interconnection and communication with smart inverters, right? That's an operations effort, right? That's an interconnection and an operations. So I think there is a stage to handle monitoring and control, right, of smart inverters and DERs. And I think we should let that get flushed out on the platform that is meant to flush that out, and not try to solve that here on this working group, because then it's going to be who should be making the decisions, a DSP working group or the interconnection working group. So that's just my thoughts. I'm not sure where the other utilities in Maryland, where their thoughts are on that, but being involved in all these different working groups, I see that's where we usually handle all things from an interconnection perspective. And if there's regulatory changes that needs to happen there within COMAR or within TIRs and things of that nature, it gets handled there. It feels like this is a scope creep, right? When we start talking about monitoring and controlling and connecting to smart inverters.
So Eric, just a clarity follow up on that. So you're saying that your planning will not be impacted by how or whether you monitor and control DERs?
So a smart inverter is not a DER, right? It's an inverter.
It is a component of a DER. That is the device that you would control the DER with.
Right. So I agree with you. It's a component of the DER.
The smart inverter is inside of the energy storage facility. Do you realize that? And inside of the vehicle. Like that's what the vehicle telematics are on an EV and a smart charger. So the smart charger, you're still controlling it through the smart inverter.
we do not have communications infrastructure to speak to 44,000 PV sites, rooftop PV sites. We do not have communications infrastructure for that, right? So,
But you do have communication structure to communicate current, yeah, BGE, you have energy storage pilots right now. So you're dispatching energy storage of third parties and company owned. Is that correct?
so you're asking me to respond to something that we already have answers to. You know, we have.
Well, you
we
just
have
said that you
power.
don't have communication, and I pointed out that you do have communications for DERs.
We do not have communications to rooftop solar, which is
That's exactly what I mean, though. This conversation needs to be broke up into by size of DER, perhaps, or type of DER.
but that is not planning.
Because some DERs you may not have control of, but others you do.
But that is not planning.
Yeah, if I can just jump in real quick. I mean, I think this was really going to the point that I made at the beginning of the meeting and in the comments is we can acknowledge that monitoring and control has an impact on the planning process, but I don't think it is on this working group to define that monitoring and control definition or processes or what that looks like, right? We're here to modify the JADE process map as is appropriate for Maryland, you know, as it relates to the distribution system planning process. And it's, you know, we can acknowledge where these other impacts are, but I don't think it's within the scope of this working group to try and define those aspects, right? There are other avenues like the interconnection working group that is the place where these discussions can have, because they have that different lens around operations and actual execution of the interconnections.
So solutions to grid needs, right? This is jumping ahead to different boxes. Whether or not you monitor and control determines your set of solutions, right? So you are currently using energy storage to defer substation capacity upgrades. You are monitoring and controlling. That is part of your planning. You planned to use that non-wired solution, and your ability to monitor and control impacted the solutions for those substations, correct?
What I'm saying is, you know, one, we're not on that box yet, but two, we can acknowledge that monitoring and control is an aspect of it, but we as a group, I don't think are in a position to define the monitoring and control of, you know, the DERs within the scope of this working group. This working group's focused on the distribution system planning process, not.
Are you seeing defining
settings for
as
inverters.
this? Oops, sorry, Jacob, I interrupted you.
I was just saying, I think our focus here is around the distribution system planning process and not defining, you know, settings for inverters or the definitions of what the monitoring and control capabilities are specifically.
Do you see defining that and your plans for monitoring and control to be distinct?
I'm not sure I understand the question.
Well, it's whether or not, like, first of all, you're making investments now that have some assumption around where you think monitoring and control are going. And if you're not, that would also be interesting to know. So if you're investing in ADMS and a DERMS, you're making some assumptions around monitoring and control. And that DERMS better be used to create solutions through your planning process, right? And so it's intricately linked. You can't, in my view, and we can deal with this in a different box, in my view, you cannot detach monitoring and control from your planning process, because that goes to the grid management component, right? How are you going to monitor and control is a large piece of your grid management.
And I think where I'm saying is, you know, and we don't need to be kind of stuck going in this circle for the rest of the, hour and a half that we have left. But,
We can
again,
go longer if you guys want.
no, we could. I enjoy these, but no, I mean, I think where I'm getting at is, yes, monitoring and control and the systems that are intended to be using for monitoring and control certainly influence what those considerations are. I'm just saying, as we're thinking as a working group, and the scope of this working group, which is around defining a distribution system planning process, defining the specifics of an operational aspect of grid management is outside the scope of this working group. This working group should be focused on distribution system planning. And there's already enough there for us to try and bite off and chew and talk about, right? And so, trying to bring in stuff that's outside the scope of this process, while yes, it is a lens we need to consider within these discussions, we're adding scope creep to something that's already a large undertaking.
All right, we'll go to Mr. Cathan and then Samantha.
I was letting Ron take the lead on most of the things I was probably going to say. So I'm going to essentially just say in a very short version is that I hear what you're saying, Jacob, that as far as the specifications and the settings and things like that, obviously would not be part of this working group. But I second what Ron is saying in that as part of planning, and as part of this is part of a discussion we had earlier about grid management, is that I would hope and expect that the Maryland utilities would make use of the new tools, whatever their settings are, going forward as part of a grid planning to address the influx of new technologies that are coming in. And I don't think it's scope creep if it's really we're focusing on ensuring that the utilities are part of their planning process are looking at these additional capabilities. So just want to second a lot of what Ron was saying.
All right, thank you, sir. Eric.
So I totally agree with what Mr. Cathan shared, his perspective in that, including that there are capabilities of smart inverters within our planning process, within our planning analysis, is something that the utilities do. We do that today. We do that within our interconnection studies today. I just wanted, just to second what Jacob shared, is that the monitoring, the controls are part of the interconnection process. It's not part of the distribution system planning process.
Right. So what it sounds like is the utilities will use whatever information that they can get from these inverters in their planning process, in their forecasting process. Is that fair? But you don't necessarily want to delve down into how exactly you're going to monitor and control each smart inverter.
So really, really good differentiation. You said in a forecast, right? What we would say is in our analysis. Forecast is different from the analysis, okay, right? We forecast the DER, we forecast the load. We don't forecast inverters or operations of inverters, right? We forecast the loads, we forecast the DERs, the contribution of the DERs, right? Within our analysis, in looking at constraints or interconnections and things of that nature, we take the smart inverter capabilities into consideration.
It's not so much the capabilities, it's more the data that you're getting from it. Is that correct?
So we are not getting any data.
Right. And you have to excuse my ignorance. I don't know.
No problem. No problem. We're not getting any data today from majority of our DERs, right? We do not integrate directly with any smart inverters today, right? If there is a battery system that we're tied to, which there are a couple here at BG, we tie to the battery management system. We don't communicate directly with the inverters, right? So I think as we are talking through these things, it's important to understand conceptually, if we're looking to get inverter data, that means you're communicating with the inverters, right? And we don't do that today.
Right, today, but I guess we're talking January 1st, 24.
No, we are not doing that January 1st, 24 either.
Okay.
Right. There will be settings that are placed in the inverters, and they just operate from the settings that are within them. It's not being controlled by anyone remotely.
Okay. All right. It's probably as much as I'm going to understand it. All right. Samantha, you had your hand up a little while ago.
I did, and thanks for remembering. I think what I was going to say has already been said by a number of folks here, but maybe just to repeat it using different words quickly. I wanted to maybe get away from the smarter inverter example and try a DERMS instead, because we seem to get bogged down with that example. And I guess the reason that I think it is in scope and does make sense to consider grid modernization and grid management technology types of things in this effort is because a world where utilities have a DERMS looks very different, and the grid needs are likely to be very different from a world where they don't. And so understanding how or rather understanding what the utilities sort of current grid modernization roadmap and timing looks like seems like an important overlay onto the planning effort. Again, I think a lot of folks have said this already, but we share that perspective over here. Thanks.
All right. Thank you, ma'am. Go ahead, Eric.
Totally agree with you there, Miss Samantha. Appreciate that perspective.
All right. All right. Well, good. All right. Eli, do you have anything else on your comments, or are you is OPC kind of good on where things stand in that from that perspective?
I think for purposes of today's discussion, we might be at a reasonable point. I think the main point that we're trying to get off, which I'm not, I guess I'm not clear if there's entire alignment across everyone here, but I think the main point is that system planning, DSP, will need to consider the operational capabilities of things like smart inverters, DERMS, as Samantha just noted, and how those things will and can be used, because they can be used to inform planning, right? If you can control and monitor DERs, if you can't control and monitor them whatsoever, then that would be one thing. But the reality is that those capabilities can exist, and therefore, if you can have the ability to monitor and therefore control the DERs, how you're controlling them will have a massive impact to planning. And if you have the ability to flex DERs at certain times and not flex them at others, that will have a significant impact as far as the constraints on the grid go. And so I think the main point we're getting at is that impact of having the monitoring and control needs to be analyzed and needs to be reflected within the way that utilities plan, from beginning as soon as these capabilities are deployed and long into the future.
Okay. It sounded like, and Eric, please correct me if I'm wrong, that you do use the information from the smart inverters in your analysis. But now, Eli, that sounds like it might be different from what you're looking at or you're wanting.
I don't know if it's, I'm trying to think of how to respond. I don't know if it's different. I think I would say if DSP needs to have an understanding of the operational parameters of what smart inverters can do, right? If there's a there needs to be a clear linkage. It might be appropriate for the other work group to determine the parameters, but these work groups need to be speaking to each other in that the parameters will then have a significant impact on, for example, the constraints that utilities are assuming in the way they do planning.
Okay.
And so there just needs to be there is a clear linkage between these two things, and therefore planning needs to reflect that there is a clear linkage and that these capabilities are coming. And once these capabilities are in full force, utilities will have increased ability to flex DERs in a way that will have to change the way planning is done.
Right. And Jacob seems to be nodding with you. I don't know if you're falling asleep or if you're agreeing with,
not during these meetings. No, I mean, I think Eli kind of really captured what I've been trying to say.
Okay, good. So
along with this, like, we have to acknowledge that those capabilities exist within system planning. I'm just saying within this working group, it's not the place to define those capabilities, but they should be reflected in the planning process.
Okay. I think, I don't, go ahead, Eli.
Hey, as long as John says yes, we can determine the parameters in the interconnection work group, then we're in good shape.
All right. Well, good. Well, you know what? That's going to be my first business. First thing I do when I get out of here, talk to John about that.
Just don't tell him it came from me.
Absolutely not. I'll blame it with someone who's not here. All right. Do we have anything else before we wrap up? All right. What I'll do is I'll follow up. I got a couple things for yes, sir, Mr. Bartlett.
Yeah, thank you, Judge. Yeah, actually, this has been very, I think, fruitful conversation, and I'm beginning to wonder if you've been very kind about sending some notes after each of these meetings, but is it possible to actually define, to get written down somewhere? If we had an AI assistant, maybe they could do this. To say what we've decided and what are the things that we've come out of the discussion so far in relation to each box that we think are components of what would be in the distribution system planning process, so that we can build on those. Because we've had a lot of discussion, but it's all in sort of people's heads, and sometimes we forget, sometimes we have to go back, but it would be good to figure out where we are so far in terms of defined components of the distribution system planning process.
So in short, are you kind of looking for like a summary of what we've covered, where we agree, where we don't agree?
Yeah, and to the extent possible on the things we do, even where we maybe don't agree, it would be about a component of the planning process that people see in different ways. But I think there are some pretty definite places where we've agreed on what are the components of the planning process, at least this far in the chain. And I think it would be good to start capturing that.
Okay. Yeah, I can try and kind of shorten up what I have so far with the report. It's kind of like all over the place because we've touched on some things kind of out of order. But yeah, I can try and do something with that, sir.
Thanks. I know it sounds like a bigger job than I'm.
No, it's okay. I will I'll put something together and see if it's kind of what you're looking for, sir.
Thanks so much.
No problem. All right. Anybody else? All right. I'll put an email together with a couple things that I've noted in terms of homework, and I'll look for anyone who wants to put comments in for boxes 3 and 4, DER and load forecast, and we'll look for those on the 7th. And if folks want to respond to those comments filed on the 7th, please do so on the 12th, and we'll plan on meeting on the 14th. Depending on how far we get, if we were somehow able to finish it up, great. If not, I'd really like to meet again on the 21st, if at all possible. I realize it's right before the holidays, but if we miss that week, then we're already into January. So but we can figure that out once we get a little bit closer. Anybody else have anything?
Just to clarify, Judge, sounds like next meeting we'll focus on boxes 3 and 4.
Yeah, yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yeah, because hopefully, we should have. I would hope we'd have a good discussion, with some more comments, especially obviously from the utilities. And to the extent, Jacob, I know you're kind of the only one here. You're not the only one here, but you're going to be. I don't know. You've been interacting the most. To the extent you can respond to what's been said here today, in addition to whatever you guys present next week or on the 7th, and then on the 14th. That would be huge.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Well, yeah, and again, as an incentive to not meet on the 21st, if we can finish on the 14th, that'd be great. All right, and then we can just pick up with boxes 5 and 6 or whatever's next in the new year. So, all right, unless anybody has anything else, we'll call it a day, and enjoy your weekend.
Sounds good.
Thanks, Judge.
Thanks,
Thank you,
everyone.
everyone.
Take care.
Thank you.
Take care, all.